The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. That's how I remember it now, anyway. At 17, sitting in that rigid plastic chair with my father beside me, I just knew it smelled wrong. Too clean. Like they were trying to scrub away something that wouldn't come out. It had been a week since that night in our living room. A week of my father making phone calls, my mother avoiding eye contact, and my siblings treating me like I might be contagious. A week of waiting for this moment, my first appointment with Dr. Morrison. 9 years later, I can tell you that some people enter your life and change everything. Dr. Morrison was one of those people. But not in the way my father hoped. It took me years to fully understand this, but I'll tell you now what I wish someone had told 17-year-old me. The problem was never who I was. The problem was a world that couldn't accept who I was. But worlds can change. People can grow. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love can learn to be bigger than fear. Dr. Richard Morrison, Ph.D., Behavioral Corrections Specialist. That's what the nameplate said. Even at 17, the word correction made my skin crawl. My father knocked twice, precise and purposeful, the way he did everything. When the door opened, Dr. Morrison wasn't what I expected. He was younger than my father, maybe early 40s, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Mr. Thompson," he said to my father, extending his hand. "And you must be the young man we discussed, not the patient, not even my name. The young man we discussed." Like I was a problem that had already been diagnosed before I'd even walked through the door. The office was exactly what you'd expect from someone who specialized in behavioral correction. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been opened, and a massive desk that created a clear barrier between him and everyone else. Behind his chair hung his degrees, psychology, theology, something called reparative therapy certification that I'd never heard of. My father and Dr. Morrison talked for maybe 10 minutes while I sat there like a specimen in a jar. They used words like concerning behaviors, developmental issues, and corrective intervention. They talked about me like I wasn't in the room, which I was starting to realize was becoming a pattern in my life. When my father finally left, promising to pick me up in an hour, the click of that door closing felt like a trap snapping shut. "So," Dr. Morrison said, settling behind his desk with a yellow legal pad, "your father tells me you've been engaging in some troubling behaviors." I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. My throat felt like sandpaper. "I need you to understand something from the beginning," he continued, his voice measured and calm. "What you're experiencing isn't normal. It isn't healthy. But the good news is, it's fixable." Fixable. There was that word again. Like I was a broken appliance that just needed the right repair manual. He asked me questions then, lots of questions. About my childhood, my relationship with my parents, my friendships, or lack thereof. About when I first started having what he called these urges. About whether I'd been exposed to inappropriate influences. "Have you ever been attracted to other boys?" he asked, at one point, his pen poised over the legal pad. "No," I said quickly. Too quickly. Because that wasn't what this was about, but I could see him making a note anyway. He scribbled something. "And the cross-dressing? How long has this been going on?" I told him. Not everything, but enough. About the dresses, about how it made me feel, about the sense of rightness that I didn't understand. I was hoping, maybe, that he'd help me make sense of it, that he'd listen and offer some kind of explanation that would make my father see I wasn't broken. Instead, he just kept taking notes. "What you're describing," he said when I finished, "is a form of gender dysphoria mixed with what we call cross-gender identification disorder. It's more common than you might think, especially in young men who've been, let's say, improperly socialized." He said it like he was diagnosing a cold. "The treatment I specialize in," Dr. Morrison explained, pulling a book from his shelf, "combines traditional psychological techniques with faith-based intervention. It's been very successful in cases like yours." He showed me the book, Healing the Masculine Soul by some author I'd never heard of. The cover showed a man standing on a mountaintop, arms raised to the sky, looking triumphant and decidedly masculine. "The core of your problem," he continued, "is a fundamental confusion about your identity as a man. This confusion manifests in what we call feminine identification behaviors, the cross-dressing, the attraction to feminine clothing and activities, the rejection of traditional masculine roles. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a particularly interesting bug. But here's what you need to understand. These feelings aren't who you are. They're symptoms of a deeper issue, an incomplete masculine development that we can, with the right approach, correct. That word again. Correct. "I'll be seeing you 3 times a week," he said, writing on an appointment card. "Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Each session will be 1 hour. I'll also be assigning you homework, exercises designed to reinforce proper masculine identification and eliminate the problematic behaviors." Homework. Like being a boy was a subject I was failing and needed to study harder for. The homework started simple enough. Masculine affirmations. I was supposed to repeat every morning while looking in the mirror. Things like, "I am a strong man," "I reject feminine thoughts and behaviors," and "I choose to embrace my masculine identity." It felt like trying to convince yourself that water wasn't wet. But I did it, because what choice did I have? There were other exercises too. I had to keep a journal of any feminine thoughts I had throughout the day and rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. I had to practice what he called masculine posture and gait. Walking with longer strides, taking up more space, keeping my shoulders back, and my voice lower. He assigned me activities. I had to join the school's intramural basketball team, even though I'd never shown any interest in sports. I had to spend at least an hour each day doing what he called masculine bonding with my father, watching football, working on the car, anything that would reinforce proper gender roles. But the hardest part was what he called aversion therapy. Whenever I had what he termed a feminine thought or cross-gender impulse, I was supposed to immediately do something physical to interrupt the thought pattern. Snap a rubber band on my wrist, do 20 push-ups, take a cold shower. The idea, he explained, was to create a negative association with these thoughts until they eventually disappeared altogether. "Think of it like training a dog," he said during one session. "Consistent negative reinforcement will eliminate unwanted behaviors." I was the dog in this scenario. 3 months. That's how long I lasted before everything started falling apart. The exercises weren't working. If anything, they were making things worse. The more I tried to suppress the thoughts, the stronger they became. The more I forced myself into masculine activities I had no interest in, the more isolated I felt from who I actually was. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror one evening trying to do the masculine affirmations, and I couldn't get the words out. My voice just stopped working. I stared at this stranger looking back at me, someone who walked differently, talked differently, acted like a person I didn't recognize. That night, I broke down. I mean, really broke down. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep you didn't even know it existed. My mother found me on my bedroom floor at 2 in the morning, sobbing into my pillow, and for a moment, just a moment, she looked at me like she saw her child instead of a problem that needed fixing. "Baby," she whispered, and it was the first time in months anyone had spoken to me with anything approaching tenderness. "What's happening to you?" But before I could answer, my father appeared in the doorway. The moment was over. "He needs to try harder," he said to my mother, not to me. "Dr. Morrison says this is normal. It's the process of breaking down old patterns before building new ones." Breaking down was right. I just wasn't sure there was going to be anything left to build back up. It was during my lunch period at school that everything changed. I was in the library, supposedly doing research for a history paper, when I decided to look up reparative therapy, those words I'd seen on Dr. Morrison's certificate. What I found made my blood run cold. Article after article about the dangers of conversion therapy. Studies showing not only that it didn't work, but that it caused lasting psychological damage. Stories from people who'd been through exactly what I was experiencing, and the trauma they carried years later. The American Psychological Association had condemned it. Major medical organizations called it harmful. The very techniques Dr. Morrison was using on me had been debunked by legitimate research. But it was the personal stories that hit me hardest. Young people who'd been told, like me, that they were broken and needed fixing, who'd spent months or years trying to change something fundamental about themselves. Many of them had attempted to unalive themselves. Some had succeeded. I realized that my father hadn't found me help, he'd found me harm, and he'd done it with the best of intentions, which somehow made it worse. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I called Dr. Morrison's office and canceled my appointment. Then I went home and told my parents I wasn't going back. The fight that followed was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. "You don't get to make this decision," my father said, his voice deadly calm. "You're 17 years old, you're my son, and you will continue with Dr. Morrison until you're fixed." "I'm not broken." The words came out louder than I intended, louder than I'd ever spoken to my father in my life. "And what he's doing to me isn't therapy, it's harm." I showed them the articles I'd printed, the research, the testimonies from survivors, the warnings from medical organizations. My mother picked up one of the papers with shaking hands. For a moment I thought I saw doubt creep into her eyes, but my father swept the papers to the floor. "This is propaganda," he said, "liberal lies designed to normalize deviant behavior. Dr. Morrison is a respected professional who comes highly recommended by our pastor. He's not helping me, Dad. He's hurting me. Can't you see that?" My father stood up, his full height making him seem impossibly tall in our suddenly small living room. When he spoke, his voice carried a finality that chilled me to the bone. "You will continue with Dr. Morrison, you will complete the treatment, and you will emerge from this as the man God intended you to be. This discussion is over." I ran away 3 days later. Not far, and not for long. Just to my aunt's house, 2 states over, my mother's sister who'd always been the family rebel, the one who asked uncomfortable questions and challenged my father's absolute authority. I called her from a payphone, crying so hard I could barely get the words out. Told her everything about Dr. Morrison, about the exercises, about feeling like I was disappearing piece by piece. She drove 4 hours to pick me up. Didn't ask questions, didn't lecture me, just held me in her small apartment while I cried out months of suppressed pain. The phone call started almost immediately, my father demanding I return, my mother pleading, threats of involving the police if my aunt didn't return their son immediately. But my aunt did something nobody else had done through this entire ordeal. She asked me what I wanted. "I want to come home," I told her. "But not to that, not to Dr. Morrison, not to being someone I'm not." "Then that's what we'll fight for," she said. The meeting that happened a week later looked nothing like that night in our living room months earlier. This time, my aunt was there. This time, I had an advocate. This time, I had a voice. I presented the research again, but this time I also presented myself, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person with the right to exist as I was. "I don't know exactly who I am yet," I told my parents, "but I know who I'm not. I'm not broken, I'm not sick, and I'm not going back to Dr. Morrison." My mother was the first to crack. She'd been reading the articles I'd left behind, doing her own research. The evidence was overwhelming. "Maybe," she said quietly, "maybe we should find a different kind of therapist. Someone who doesn't try to change you, but helps you understand yourself." It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it was the beginning of something that looked like it might become love. My father took longer, months longer. But eventually, even he had to admit that Dr. Morrison's methods weren't helping. They were destroying his beloved son. Real therapy, the kind that actually helps instead of harms, started 6 months later. Dr. Sarah Chen was everything Dr. Morrison wasn't. She listened without judgment. She asked questions designed to help me understand myself, not to lead me toward predetermined conclusions. She helped me sort through the trauma of those months with Dr. Morrison, while also exploring who I really was underneath all the fear and confusion. It took years to undo the damage of those 3 months. Years to trust my own thoughts and feelings again. Years to rebuild a relationship with my parents based on who I actually was instead of who they wanted me to be. My father and I still don't see eye to eye on everything. Probably never will. But we've learned to love each other across our differences, which is more than I thought possible during those dark months when I was 17. The person I am today, the person I was always meant to be, isn't who Dr. Morrison was trying to create. I'm not the traditionally masculine son my father originally wanted, but I'm also not broken or sick or in need of fixing. I'm just me, and that turned out to be enough. If you're watching this and you're going through something similar, I want you to know something. You are not broken. If someone is telling you that fundamental parts of who you are need to be corrected or fixed, they're wrong. If someone is using shame and fear to try to change your identity, that's not therapy, that's abuse. Real help exists. Therapists who understand that their job isn't to change who you are, but to help you become the healthiest, most authentic version of yourself. Support groups full of people who've walked similar paths. Families who've learned to love without conditions. The story doesn't end here, of course. Building authentic relationships takes time. Learning to trust yourself again doesn't happen overnight. But it does happen, and every day gets a little bit easier. That 17-year-old boy who was so afraid, so confused, so convinced he was fundamentally wrong about himself. He's okay now. He's more than okay. He's free.